The first president of the United States was George Washington. He was born on February 22, 1732 in Virginia. As a young man, he learned to survey the land, and by age 17, he was the official surveyor of Culpeper County, Virginia. After his brother Lawrence died from smallpox, George decided to follow in his footsteps and join the colonial army. At the age of 20, he held the rank of major. He proved himself to be an outstanding soldier and soon held the rank of lieutenant colonel. He fought bravely in the French and Indian War, which was fought in the American colonies, but in reality, it was a war between the nations of France and Britain. At the age of 26, Washington resigned from the Army and returned to his home. On January 6, 1759, Washington married a widow named Martha Dandridge Custis. He was elected to a seat in the Virginia House of Burgesses while he was still in the Army, but longed for the simple life at his home plantation, which was called Mount Vernon. When the colonies began to protest England's control of them, Washington was quite supportive of his fellow colonists. In September of 1774, Washington attended the First Continental Congress as a representative of Virginia. The 13 colonies had gathered in Philadelphia to discuss their complaints against England. After much discussion, they decided to meet again the following spring to address any unresolved grievances. Unfortunately, the Revolutionary War broke out before they were able to reconvene. On April 19, 1775, British soldiers attacked colonial militiamen at the battles of Lexington and Concord. It was known as the shot heard round the world. The war for America's independence had begun. When the Second Continental Congress finally convened, it was decided by a unanimous vote that George Washington would lead the fight against England. At 43 years of age, George Washington became Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. For 6 long years, he led his army through terrible hardships and courageous victories. Finally, in October of 1781, British troops under General Cornwallis surrendered to General Washington after the Battle of Yorktown in Virginia. The fighting was over, but the official end of the war would not come until 1783 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. Washington, now a national hero, resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army and returned to his home at Mount Vernon. When delegates to the Constitutional Convention gathered in Philadelphia in 1787 to draft a new framework of government for their new country, Washington was called to participate. On the very first day, he was elected president of the convention. After many months of debates and compromises, the United States Constitution was signed on September 17, 1787. It called for a federal government consisting of a legislative branch, which wrote the laws, an executive branch, which enforced the laws, and a judicial branch, which would determine which laws were constitutional or not. The head of the executive branch would be the President of the United States. By a unanimous vote, George Washington was elected our nation's first president. He took his oath of office on April 30, 1789, in the temporary federal capital of New York City, and went on to serve 2 full terms. It was during his 8 years in office that a national bank was founded, national currency was first issued, and the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution. He went on to set many precedents and traditions that were followed by each of the men who became president after him. He refused to serve a 3rd term and retired from office in 1797. He returned once again to his beloved Mount Vernon. His quiet, peaceful retirement from public life did not last long, however. On December 19, 1799, George Washington died at the age of 67. The United States Congress remembered Washington as first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. The second President of the United States was John Adams. He was born on October 30th, 1735 in Braintree, Massachusetts. As a young man, he attended Harvard College to become a congregational minister. But upon graduating in 1755, he turned his attentions elsewhere. He taught school, studied law, and eventually became a lawyer in the city of Boston. In 1764, he married Abigail Smith. Abigail would one day have the distinction of being the only woman to be the wife of one president and mother to another. Her son, John Quincy Adams, was our nation's 6th president. John Adams was elected to the Massachusetts legislature in both the First and Second Continental Congress. In 1775, it was he who nominated George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. The following year, he served on the committee appointed to write the Declaration of Independence, but left most of the writing to Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. He later went on to help write the Massachusetts Constitution and was one of the men chiefly responsible for drafting the Treaty of Paris, which officially ended the Revolutionary War in 1783. In 1784, Adams was appointed the first American minister to England. In 1789, he became our nation's first vice president under George Washington. In 1796, John Adams was elected our nation's 2nd president of the United States. During his administration, the nations of England and France were at war, and American shipping interests were caught in the middle. Adams, being a great statesman, was able to stop America from becoming directly involved in the conflict. This earned him much respect from his peers. In 1800, Adams became the first president to live in the White House, the official residence of the president. Before he left office, Adams appointed John Marshall as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Marshall would make the Supreme Court as powerful an institution as both the Congress and the presidency. Adams left Washington with his wife Abigail and returned to Massachusetts to live in the town of Quincy. In his later years, he and Thomas Jefferson wrote each other frequently. On July 4, 1826, John Adams died. It was exactly 50 years after he and the other founding fathers had signed the Declaration of Independence. His last words were, "Jefferson still lives," unaware that his friend had died earlier that very same day. Our nation's 3rd president was Thomas Jefferson. He was born on April 13, 1743 in Shadwell, Virginia. At the age of 14, his father passed away, and so Thomas became the head of his household. At 17, he enrolled at William and Mary College in Williamsburg, Virginia, where he excelled at almost everything he studied. This included science, religion, politics, mathematics, history, and agriculture. Upon graduation, Jefferson studied law and became a lawyer. From 1769 to 1774, he served as a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, which was Virginia's colonial legislature. In 1772, Jefferson married Martha Wales Skelton on New Year's Day. 2 years later, Jefferson published his pamphlet entitled A Summary View of the Rights of British America. In this pamphlet, he asserted that the British government, known as Parliament, had no authority whatsoever over the 13 American colonies, which at the time were under British control. In 1776, Jefferson became a delegate to the Second Continental Congress, which was meeting in Philadelphia. Jefferson was appointed to a 5-man committee to draft an official Declaration of Independence from England. Other notable members of the committee were John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. The other members all agreed that Jefferson was the one best suited to draft such an historic document. He was reluctant at first, but soon took pen to paper to create a document which would be, in his words, an expression of the American mind. Indeed it was. His words and ideals have since become immortal. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. After Jefferson completed his rough draft, he presented the document to the other members of the committee for approval. John Adams and Benjamin Franklin made only minor changes to the Declaration, and it was presented to the Continental Congress, where it was finally approved on July 4, 1776. After leaving the Second Continental Congress, Jefferson served as wartime governor of Virginia and was responsible for establishing freedom of religion in Virginia's state constitution. In 1782, Jefferson's wife Martha became ill and unfortunately died. She was just 33 years old. The following year, he was elected to Congress. In 1785, he was minister to France. 4 years later, he returned home to become President Washington's first Secretary of State. During the Adams administration, Jefferson served as vice president. In the presidential election of 1800, there was a tie in the number of votes needed to become president. The United States House of Representatives would decide who would win, Jefferson or his rival, Aaron Burr of New York. After 36 ballots, Jefferson was officially elected our nation's third president. His inaugural in 1801 was the first to be held in the federal capital of Washington, D.C. As president, he arranged for the purchase of the Louisiana Territory from France. The land he bought stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. The Louisiana Purchase more than doubled the size of the United States. Jefferson then sent two men named Meriwether Lewis and William Clark into the new territory with a large expeditionary force. Their journey to the Pacific Ocean and back opened the West to all Americans. After serving 2 terms in office, Jefferson left Washington, D.C. and founded the University of Virginia. He lived the rest of his days at Monticello, the house he had built from his own design. Like his predecessor, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson died on July 4, 1826, 50 years after the Declaration of Independence. Our nation's 4th president was James Madison. He was born on March 16, 1751, at Port Conway, Virginia. He grew up on Montpelier, his family's large plantation. Although he was a Southerner, Madison decided to go to college in the North. He chose the College of New Jersey, which is known today as Princeton University. It was there that he studied law. In 1776, Madison was sent as a delegate to the Virginia Convention to help in the drafting of the state constitution. It was here that he met Thomas Jefferson, and the two men became friends. In 1779, he was elected to the Second Continental Congress. At age 29, Madison was its youngest member. After the Revolutionary War, many important men in public service realized that their system of government was seriously flawed. In September of 1786, James Madison and Alexander Hamilton of New York called for a convention in Philadelphia the following May. The goal of this convention was to make important changes to the old system of government called the Articles of Confederation. The end result, however, would produce one of the most important documents in human history and a framework for democracy that has lasted over 200 years. The Constitutional Convention took place between May and September in 1787. Of the 13 states, all but Rhode Island sent delegates. The detailed accounts of the actual debates were recorded by James Madison and remained secret until 1840, over 50 years after the convention. Exceeding their instructions to revise the Articles of Confederation, the delegates decided to frame a new form of government. Madison took part in nearly all the debates. This new form of government was the United States Constitution. The delegates believed that this 3-branch system of government, with a legislative, executive, and judicial body, would serve the American people well. Each system of checks and balances between the different branches assured the public that this new government would not and could not become as tyrannical as England and its king had been. James Madison was one of the men that served on the committee that drafted the new Constitution. On September 17, 1787, after 3.5 months of debate and compromise, the United States Constitution was signed by a majority of the delegates. The convention sent the new document to Congress, which in turn submitted it to each of the states for ratification. The Constitution's staunchest defenders were James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, future Chief Justice of the First Supreme Court. Together, they wrote 85 essays in favor of ratification. These essays were known as the Federalist Papers and are considered to be the best analysis of the Constitution ever written. Opposition to the Constitution was silenced after James Madison and his supporters pledged to add amendments guaranteeing the civil rights of the people upon ratification of the historic document. After the states approved the Constitution, it became the law of the land. In 1789, James Madison was elected to the United States House of Representatives. He would serve in the House for 8 years. In June of that year, Madison proposed a series of amendments to protect the civil rights and liberties of the American people. 12 of these amendments were offered to the states. The states, in turn, ratified 10 of them by December 15, 1791. Together, they are known as the Bill of Rights and are considered the cornerstone to individual freedom in America. These rights include freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, the right to a trial by jury, and protection against cruel and unusual punishment. In September of 1794, James Madison married a widow named Dolly Payne Todd. After Thomas Jefferson was elected president in 1800, he chose Madison as his Secretary of State. He served in this position for 8 years. Since Thomas Jefferson was a widower and never remarried, Dolly Madison served as the official White House hostess. In the presidential election of 1808, James Madison was victorious and became our nation's 4th president and served for 2 full terms. In 1812, he signed a declaration of war against England for seizing American ships and sailors in their ongoing conflict with France. The worst moment of the war occurred in August of 1814, when the British attacked Washington, D.C. and burned the Capitol building and the White House. Mr. Madison's War, as it was called, officially ended on December 24, 1814, with the signing of the Treaty of Ghent in the country of Belgium. Before news of the peace agreement reached the United States, one last battle was fought. The Battle of New Orleans in Louisiana was a great American victory and marked a glorious ending to the War of 1812. After he left office in 1817, James Madison and his wife returned home to Montpelier. On June 28, 1836, James Madison died at the age of 85. For all of his efforts in establishing the federal government of the United States, James Madison is regarded as the father of the Constitution. Our nation's 5th president was James Monroe. He was born on April 28, 1758, in Westmoreland County, Virginia. As a young man, Monroe enrolled at William and Mary College. But when the Revolutionary War broke out, he left college to enlist in the Continental Army. For his bravery in the Battle of Trenton, General George Washington promoted him to the rank of captain. After the war, Monroe was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses and later served in the Continental Congress. In 1786, he married Elizabeth Courtright. In 1790, he was elected to the United States Senate. In 1803, President Jefferson sent Monroe to France, where he negotiated the Louisiana Purchase. Under President Madison, he served as Secretary of State and as Secretary of War. In 1816, James Monroe was elected President of the United States and was re-elected in 1820. His administration ushered in what became known as the Era of Good Feeling. In 1823, he issued the Monroe Doctrine, which forbade European nations to interfere with nations in the Western Hemisphere. In 1825, he left the presidency and retired to his home in Virginia called Oak Hill. After the death of his wife, he moved to New York City, where he died on July 4, 1831, at the age of 73. James Monroe is considered the last of our founding fathers to become president. Patrick Henry was a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses. In March of 1775, a Virginia convention was held in Old St. John's Church in the city of Richmond. Believing that war with England was inevitable, Patrick Henry urged his fellow Virginians to take up arms and fight for their freedom. Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Just 1 month later, the Revolutionary War began. Patrick Henry went on to become governor of Virginia and was re-elected 4 times. John Hancock of Massachusetts was president of the Second Continental Congress. This was the Congress that wrote and voted for the Declaration of Independence. His signature on this historic document is by far the largest of any delegate. He wanted to make sure that the King of England could read his signature without the use of glasses. Samuel Adams of Massachusetts was a cousin of President John Adams. He is said to be chiefly responsible for the Boston Tea Party. This was a protest against England's efforts to tax the colonies. Bostonians disguised themselves as Indians and boarded British ships that held cargoes of tea. The men dumped every last crate of tea into Boston's harbor. Samuel Adams was a member of both the First and Second Continental Congress. He went on to succeed John Hancock as governor of Massachusetts. Alexander Hamilton of New York served under General Washington in the Revolutionary War. After the war, he served in the Continental Congress. After signing the United States Constitution in 1787, he became one of its staunchest supporters. As stated earlier, he wrote many essays which were known as the Federalist Papers in support of the document, along with James Madison and John Jay. In 1789, he became our nation's first Secretary of the Treasury under President Washington. In the election of 1800, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr were tied in their votes for president. The election went to the House of Representatives to be decided. Hamilton threw his support behind Jefferson, and Jefferson won the election. In 1804, his New York rival, Aaron Burr, challenged Hamilton to a duel. Burr believed that Hamilton had insulted him and chose this method to settle the score. The duel took place on July 11, 1804. Alexander Hamilton was mortally wounded and died the following day. He will always be remembered, though, for his expertise as Secretary of the Treasury. The oldest and most distinguished man to sign the Declaration of Independence was Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania. He was a printer, a scientist, an inventor, a diplomat, an author, and a fire chief, just to name a few of the many hats he wore during his lifetime. He once demonstrated that lightning was electricity by allowing a kite he was flying to be struck by it during a thunderstorm. This led Franklin to invent the lightning rod. He also invented the Franklin stove and bifocal eyeglasses. He published Poor Richard's Almanac and wrote his own biography. After he signed the Declaration of Independence, he helped negotiate the Treaty of Paris, which officially ended the Revolutionary War in 1783. In 1787, he signed the United States Constitution. Benjamin Franklin died in 1790 at the ripe old age of 84.